The autumn breeze swept through the streets of San Francisco, carrying the scent of freshly brewed coffee from Mocha Haven, a charming boutique café where the aroma of espresso intertwined with the soft hum of jazz, offering a warm refuge from the city's relentless pace. Audrey Moore, a skilled barista, moved behind the counter with effortless precision. She had been in this business long enough to read people through their coffee choices. She knew who preferred bold flavors, who needed extra sweetness, who came for the love of coffee, and who simply sought a quiet escape from life's relentless demands. At a corner table near the window, one man caught her attention instantly. He sat alone, absently stirring his espresso, his slate-gray eyes fixed on a distant point, as though lost in a world far removed from the cafe's warm embrace, a world only he could see. Maggie Lopez, Audrey's co-worker and closest friend, brushed past her and murmured under her breath, "Do you know who that is? That's Egbert Augustus, CEO of Augustus Tech. His company just hit a $2 billion valuation, but look at him. He looks like he's lost everything." Audrey frowned slightly. She had seen wealthy patrons in this cafe countless times, but Egbert was different. There was something profoundly real, achingly lonely about him, and for some reason, she couldn't look away. All evening, Audrey found herself drawn to Egbert. She watched him in quiet observation, noticing the little details most would overlook. The way he placed his phone face up on the table, its screen lighting up repeatedly with notifications he never bothered to check. The way his fingers idly traced the rim of his untouched espresso cup, lost in thought. And most of all, his eyes. The eyes of a man carrying a grief too heavy to name. As the night wore on, Mocha Haven emptied, leaving only a handful of patrons absorbed in books or tapping away at their laptops. Audrey wiped down the counter, but her gaze kept drifting back to Egbert. And then she saw something unexpected, a single tear slipping silently down his cheek. Before she could think, before she could second-guess herself, Audrey was moving toward him. She leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sometimes we need a reminder that we're still alive." Egbert looked up, his slate-gray eyes momentarily flickering with confusion. But before he could react, Audrey bent down and pressed a soft, fleeting kiss against his lips. For a heartbeat, everything stood still. The kiss was barely more than a breath, but it carried something powerful. A spark slipping through the cracks of the walls Egbert had spent years building around himself. He inhaled sharply, as if feeling something real for the first time in ages. Audrey stepped back, her heart pounding in her chest. Egbert stared at her, and this time his eyes were not just filled with sorrow. There was something else, a flicker of something long buried, something forgotten. "What's your name?" His voice was low, a little rough. "Audrey Moore." Egbert nodded slowly, as if committing each syllable to memory. "Thank you, Audrey Moore," he murmured. "I think I needed that more than I realized." Audrey sat on the worn wooden chair in her tiny apartment, staring at her untouched cup of tea. She had spent the entire night trying to push away the memory of the kiss, but the feeling still lingered. It was reckless, impulsive, but also strangely meaningful in a way she couldn't explain. Across the city, Egbert Augustus stood in front of his office's floor-to-ceiling window, gazing down at the glittering lights of San Francisco. But instead of focusing on financial reports or upcoming meetings, his mind was consumed by one thing: Audrey Moore's fleeting but electrifying kiss. The next morning, as Audrey walked into Mocha Haven, she hoped a busy shift would clear her thoughts. But the moment she stepped behind the counter, Maggie was already there, smirking mischievously while holding a small envelope. "He came back looking for you," Maggie teased, nudging Audrey. "Egbert Augustus. He asked about you and left this." Audrey hesitated before opening the envelope. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. "Thank you for reminding me that I'm still alive. If you're willing, meet me at Pier 39 this Saturday afternoon. No pressure, no expectations, just a conversation. Egbert Augustus." Below the signature was a phone number. Audrey stared at it, her emotions swirling. Maggie folded her arms, watching her with an amused expression. "Are you going to text him?" Audrey clenched the letter in her hands. Every logical part of her screamed that this was a bad idea, that she shouldn't get involved with a man like Egbert, someone carrying too much grief, too many ghosts. But her heart whispered something different. Taking a deep breath, she unlocked her phone and started typing. "I'll be there, but no fancy restaurants. If we're going to talk, let's do it somewhere real." Across the city, Egbert's phone vibrated. As he read Audrey's message, a slow, genuine smile crossed his face. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of hope. The evening at Pier 39 was breathtaking. The sunset painted the sky in hues of gold and crimson, its reflection shimmering on the waves. The air carried a blend of salt, caramel, and freshly baked pastries from nearby stalls. Audrey arrived earlier than planned, partly to soak in the calm, partly because she wasn't sure what to expect. She chose a small café by the waterfront, cozy, unpretentious, and warm. It was nothing like the upscale restaurants she imagined Egbert Augustus would frequent. When Egbert arrived, Audrey was surprised. He wasn't in a tailored suit, but in a dark sweater and jeans. He looked more human, more approachable. "You picked a great spot," Egbert said, taking a seat across from her. Audrey shrugged, lifting her coffee cup. "It's comfortable, and I didn't think you'd want anything too fancy." Egbert chuckled softly, a rare but genuine sound. "You're right. I've had enough of luxury for a lifetime." Their conversation flowed easily, more naturally than Audrey expected. Egbert spoke about his early days as a young programmer, spending countless hours in cafes, working tirelessly on ideas that would one day change his life. Audrey shared memories of her childhood with Helen, the woman who taught her how to brew coffee and inspired her to dream of having her own shop. They talked, they laughed. For the first time, it felt like they were just two ordinary people finding a connection. But then Egbert felt quiet. He gazed at the water, his expression unreadable. 3 years ago, I lost my wife and son in a car accident, he said softly. Since then, I stopped believing in good things. Audrey didn't speak right away. She didn't try to offer empty comfort or tell him that time heals all wounds. Instead, she simply placed her hand lightly on the table, not touching his, but close enough for him to know she was there. Egbert glanced at her hand, as if considering something before taking a slow breath. "What about you?" he asked, turning his gaze back to her. Audrey gave a small, sad smile. "I know loss too. I lost my parents when I was young, but I learned that sometimes the only way forward is to find something worth holding on to." Egbert held her gaze for a long time, then slowly nodded. For the first time in a long while, he felt seen. And in that moment, the world seemed to slow down. The sound of waves lapping against the shore, the glow of streetlights reflecting in Egbert's eyes. Neither of them spoke, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was warm, familiar, safe. Finally, Egbert spoke, his voice quiet but sincere. "Thank you, Audrey." Audrey tilted her head, curious. "For what?" Egbert smiled, no longer weighed down by exhaustion or grief. "For reminding me that I'm still alive." 2 days after their heartfelt evening at Pier 39, Audrey still couldn't shake the feeling that something between them had shifted. There was something there, something real. That morning, as she stepped into Mocha Haven, she expected nothing more than a regular day at work. But before she could even tie on her apron, Maggie rushed toward her, eyes wide in disbelief. "Audrey, you're not going to believe this." "What?" Audrey blinked. Maggie shoved her phone into Audrey's hands. The screen displayed a financial news article with a bold headline. Egbert Augustus acquires Sweet Beans Café chain, plans nationwide expansion. Audrey frowned. "Sweet Beans? So what?" Maggie stared at her like she had just spoken nonsense. "Sweet Beans is the biggest boutique cafe chain in the city, and that's not all." Just then, the cafe door swung open and Egbert walked in. Audrey's heartbeat stuttered. Was he here because of this? Egbert smiled at her, but Audrey could tell there was tension behind it. "Can we talk outside for a moment?" he asked. Audrey hesitated, then untied her apron and followed him outside into the crisp morning air. Egbert took a deep breath, then met her eyes. I have something for you. Audrey frowned. What do you mean? Egbert reached into his pocket, pulling out a key and a small envelope. This store, he said, placing the key in her palm. One of Sweet Bean's locations. It's yours, Audrey. I wanted to help make your dream a reality. For a moment, time stood still. Audrey stared at the key in her hand, then at Egbert. Her heart sank. You think I couldn't do this on my own? Her voice was quiet, but sharp. Egbert frowned. No, I just wanted to help. Help? Audrey let out a small, humorless laugh. You made a decision for me, Egbert. You bought an entire cafe chain and picked out a store like it was some kind of gift, without ever asking if I wanted it. Egbert opened his mouth to respond, but Audrey shook her head, disappointment flashing across her face. I told you about my dream, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. I wanted to build my own cafe, from nothing. I've been working for years, saving every penny. And what did you do? You turned it into a present? Like I'm some kid playing business? Egbert's expression flickered with uncertainty. I just thought you deserved an easier start. Audrey inhaled sharply, feeling as if she had been betrayed. You don't understand me at all, do you? She pressed the key back into Egbert's hand. I don't need this, and I don't need someone who thinks they can buy my dream for me. Egbert looked down at the key, then back up at her. For the first time in a long time, he was at a loss for words. Good luck with Sweet Beans, Audrey said, her voice rough with emotion. Then she turned and walked back inside, leaving Egbert standing alone, realizing that for the first time in years, he had made a mistake that might cost him something truly irreplaceable. Audrey didn't look back as she walked into Mocha Haven, but her heart was racing. She wasn't sure if she was angry at Egbert or at herself for feeling so hurt. She tried to focus on work, but her mind kept replaying their conversation. The way Egbert had looked at her, confused, disappointed, but also wounded. That night, she sat alone in her tiny apartment, flipping through the worn pages of Helen's recipe book. Every note, every scribbled down dream was something she had built for herself. And yet, why did it feel like she had just walked away from something just as important? The sharp ring of her phone pulled her out of her thoughts. Maggie, are you really going to let it end like this? Maggie asked the moment Audrey answered. What else is there to say? Audrey sighed. Maybe the truth? Maggie's voice softened. Danny, Egbert's assistant, told me he had been planning to buy Sweet Beans for a long time, even before he met you. And giving you that cafe wasn't about thinking you couldn't do it on your own. It was about wanting to be part of your dream. Audrey tightened her grip on the phone. Egbert never told her that. If you really care about him, at least hear him out, Maggie urged gently. Audrey closed her eyes. Maggie was right. She had spent so long fighting to prove herself, but maybe this time she needed to listen. The next morning, Audrey stood outside Augustus Tech's headquarters, her heart pounding harder than she liked. She dialed Egbert's number. It barely rang twice before he picked up. Audrey? His voice was rough, surprised, but filled with hope. I think we need to talk. Her voice was quiet, but steady. On the other end of the line, she could hear Egbert exhale, a breath of relief. Where are you? She asked. At my office, but if you want to meet, I'll go anywhere. Audrey took a deep breath, then smiled softly. I'm already downstairs. Egbert shot up from his chair the moment he heard Audrey's words. You're downstairs? His voice held a mix of disbelief, as if afraid this was just a dream. Yeah, how long are you planning to keep me waiting out here? Audrey asked, keeping her voice steady even though her heart was racing. Less than 3 minutes later, the glass doors of the building swung open and Egbert stepped out. He wasn't wearing a suit, just a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He looked exhausted, yet his eyes lit up the moment they landed on her. Audrey crossed her arms, watching him carefully. So, do you have something to say to me? Egbert exhaled deeply, then nodded. I was wrong, he admitted. I thought that if I could help you achieve your dream faster, it would be the right thing to do. But I didn't realize your dream isn't just about owning a cafe. It's about the journey to get there. Audrey said nothing, letting him continue. I wasn't trying to buy your dream, Audrey. I just wanted to have a place in it. You've changed me in ways I can't even explain, and I thought that if I could help you, that was the only way I could be worthy of what you've done for me. Audrey felt something tighten in her chest. She knew Egbert wasn't the kind of man who easily expressed emotions. For him to admit his mistake and lay his feelings bare like this, it wasn't something she could ignore. And what do you think now? She asked quietly. Egbert held her gaze, his sincerity shining through. I think if you still want to chase your dream your way, then I'll stand beside you. I'll support you, but I won't interfere. He hesitated for a moment before chuckling. And I promise not to buy any more cafe chains without telling you first. Audrey laughed, the sound lighter than it had been in days. That's a good start, she said, and for the first time since their argument, she felt some of the weight lift from her chest. Egbert took a deep breath, then asked softly, So, can you forgive me? Audrey held his gaze for a long moment before finally allowing a small smile. I'll think about it, she said, and for the first time, she used I'll instead of I. Egbert noticed the shift, and a flicker of hope appeared in his eyes. 2 weeks had passed since their conversation, and Audrey still hadn't given Egbert a direct answer. But there was one thing she couldn't deny. He had kept his word. He hadn't bought another cafe. He hadn't tried to interfere in her plans, but he still showed up, not as an investor, but as a friend. Every evening after work, Audrey would find a small paper bag waiting outside her apartment door. Sometimes it was a book about business. Other times, a dessert from a tiny bakery. And once, a bag of premium coffee beans with a note attached. I haven't bought any cafes, but can I still buy coffee? Audrey laughed when she read it. Egbert Augustus, the billionaire CEO, was trying to win her over with coffee. And worse, it was working. 3 months later, on a bright autumn morning, their cafe finally opened. A wooden sign above the door read, Audrey and Moore, every cup has a story. As the doors swung open, the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the scent of warm pastries. The cafe wasn't the biggest in town, but it was cozy, full of life. The kind of place that made people feel at home the moment they stepped inside. Audrey stood behind the counter, watching as their first customers walked in. Neighbors, old colleagues, and even strangers drawn to the new cafe on the block. Egbert approached, sleeves rolled up, no longer the distant, untouchable CEO he used to be. He wasn't just an observer today, he was part of this dream. Ready? Egbert asked, his voice warm. Audrey took a deep breath, then smiled. Always. She started brewing their first cup of coffee, while Egbert greeted customers at the door. They worked together effortlessly, as if they had been doing this their whole lives. That night, after closing, Audrey sat by the window, a steaming latte warming her hands. Egbert joined her, settling into the seat across from her. Today was better than I imagined, he said softly, his gaze filled with quiet pride and something deeper, gratitude. Yeah, Audrey smiled, looking around. Everything she had dreamed of was now real. She turned to Egbert. Do you regret investing in my dream? Egbert chuckled, shaking his head. No, but do you regret letting me be part of it? Audrey held his gaze for a long moment before shaking her head. No, maybe. This was how it was meant to be. Egbert leaned forward slightly, his expression softer than ever. I once thought I'd never love again, Audrey. His voice was quiet but honest. But you made me believe in good things again. Audrey felt her heart skip a beat. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she simply placed her hand on the table. Egbert glanced down, then slowly laid his hand over hers. No more words were needed. She understood. He understood. They didn't need a perfect ending. They just needed a new beginning, a journey they would take together. Outside the window, the city lights continued to flicker in the never-sleeping streets, but inside August and Moore, time stood still. Just two people, two dreams, and a story that was only just beginning.